Hello there, YouTube, and welcome back to another Cats discussion. Today we are going to be talking to SJ Thomason about faith and how we actually believe and not believe and disbelieve, how we come to the fact of either going towards a God or going away from God. Now, SJ is obviously going to go to explain the reasons why that somebody might go towards a god or a god figure, regardless of what type of religion it is. And I'm assuming that I will probably try and do something in the reverse of that. But before we get into the discussion, hello, SJ, how are you doing? And just let us know a little bit about yourself before we get into the discussion.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me on. So I'm SJ Thomason. I'm from the United States. I'm a college professor over here, and I teach leadership and human resource management and business communication and other courses like that. And I also am interested in apologetics. I dove in probably about 7 years ago when I felt that I started to realize that God was making himself very obvious in my life. And so I went on Twitter to try to share the good news, and I found that a lot of people weren't going to believe my personal testimony. So I started reading as much as I could into apologetics. And so now I've developed a little bit more of evidence-based reasoning for why I believe.
No, that's fair enough. I completely understand how people's different beliefs would take them down their different ways. Before going into the aspect of religion, I don't want to go into the aspect of politics, but I wanted to use it as a juxtaposition, as a metaphor for what we're going down. Some people will believe in the aspects of Democrats, as in for the US, or for Labour in the UK, or socialistic ideas for the rest of the world. And some people would go more to a nationalistic idea, or more of a capitalistic idea, or Republican or conservative. So are those political beliefs transmuted into a religious belief? Because the reason why I pose this question is because the belief systems in politics and religion can and do sometimes overlap each other. So before I go any further into that analogy, SJ, if you wouldn't mind, would you be able to answer a question for me? What is it that drew you to, you were saying obviously before actually, that you were finding more reasons to believe in a God. What were those types of reasons, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, God started making himself obvious in dreams, in visions, in spiritual experiences. And so that's what drove me into it. And speaking of politics, I want to say something about what you just mentioned with Democratic and Republican parties. I consider myself a moderate. And I think what people do is they try to fit their religion into their politics. And many people assume that because I'm a Christian that I must be on the right and I must be a Trump supporter, but that's actually not the case. I'm right in the middle, and I'll vote for the best candidate. And I am hoping that Joe Biden, for example, is the one on the Democratic ticket, because I think he's the most moderate out of that group. But a lot of people will try to fit their religion into their beliefs. So if you're a Democrat, you would probably say, well, Jesus is a socialist and he appreciates socialism. And if you're a Republican, you're probably going to say, well, Jesus also had the parable of the minas, or the parable of the talents, that basically says we're each given proportional gifts and we're supposed to use those gifts in various ways. And he expects that we use our resources and everything that he's given us to maximize our assets and to maximize our gifts for him. So that's just two different views, and people kind of take a little bit out of each view depending on which political system they follow and try to fit it in with whatever their religious beliefs are. And that's, again, the Christians, a lot of times people think that you're on the right, but there are a lot of Christian Democrats too.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, that's the reason why I would say that it comes to sort of a belief system, because we already make prejudgments about different labels. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't know that, for instance, I went to church today. Now, I'm one of the most staunchest atheists that you could probably could get. But yet, I'm going to church because I want to get married to my partner. Because you have to make a connection to be able to get married into the church that you want to get married in certain places. So when I go into church, I don't necessarily say all the prayers, and I don't necessarily believe in what's being espoused. Now, I can take aspects of what's being said. I could enjoy the singing and the hymns and the things like that, or if I wanted to take part in the communion and do stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that I necessarily have to believe in all of that. So that's why I'm trying to go with the understanding of what makes somebody believe in a God, regardless of whatever God it may be. But what was it that drew you to a God?
I've always had a belief in God. I've always felt that there's a supreme being and there's a higher power. I question his form. I was raised in the Catholic Church, and it sounds like you must have gone. Is it a Catholic church you went to today?
Church of England, so it's a
Okay.
mixture of everything.
Okay. So I was raised in the Catholic Church, and I left religion. I left the Catholic faith pretty much I pretty much left in right around my early 20s. And for a couple of decades, I basically waffled about not really knowing exactly what I believed. And I was thinking that Eastern religions were superior. And then I said a few prayers, and I felt like I needed the answer. I needed to know if Christianity was true, or if other faiths were better, or I should be worshiping these other sorts of God or gods or whatever. And so I basically started praying. And in one instance, I asked for answers, and I happened to find myself on a plane next to a pastor around the same time. And he directed me to C.S. Lewis's adult books. And I went home and immediately bought Mere Christianity, Great Divorce, and Screwtape Letters, and a bunch of his other books. And in Mere Christianity, the trilemma was a game changer for me. So basically, he says that let's part with any nonsense about Jesus just being a great moral teacher. He didn't give us that choice. He either was Lord, lunatic, or liar. And so we have to make a choice. And that just struck with me. And so that was one step of many steps that I started traveling up the staircase to get closer to God. And that was one sign from God, it seemed to me. And I've had a few others that are kind of similar to that. And I've just really found faith to be very rewarding and personally fulfilling. And I think you might have seen, I don't know if you watched the one video that I made, but I made a video where I talked about our hardwiring, because out of the University of Oxford, they conducted global studies, and they basically found that humans are hardwired to seek God, to seek meaning, to seek purpose. And when we do seek God and when we do meditate, they've shown that there's an area of the brain that has a lot of activity. And so, and it brings a lot of joy. So they've actually done brain studies and found out that this idea of belief and meditation and prayer actually brings joy physically. So that's sort of an interesting thing when you think that humans are actually wired for God.
Well, I disbelieve that they're wired for a God, but I do understand the premise behind the actual idea of if you were to meditate and were able to, say, pray, and you were having the, should we say, intoxication with the belief of believing that you're talking to somebody or having something good thrusted upon you, then you're naturally going to have an endorphin mix that is going to endure and be happier for yourself. But I would agree with you that we are very wired for a purpose and for the understanding of what the world is made and what the world is for and what our purpose is in the world. I do believe that we do go out and we do try and find those meanings. Us as animals do that constantly. Would it be fair for me to be able to summarize your reason for belief would be because you were searching for a reason to believe?
No, I just always had that inner feeling that there is a higher power. There's something beyond us. There's a metaphysical truth. And so I just didn't know what God's form was, but I definitely always questioned what this metaphysical presence was. And I've had things happen in my life that I can say that and also supported this. For example, when I was in college, I had a dream that this girl who was sitting 3 rows ahead of me in an accounting class would be my roommate at a different school where I was transferring in the second half of my sophomore year. And it turns out, and I know it sounds like a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it turns out 2 days later, she and I were walking out of the accounting class, and I had never talked to her before. And I told my sister about the dream. I said, wow, this is really crazy. There's a girl who's in my class. I had a dream that she'd be my roommate up at Florida State. And so I was walking out of the class, and she comes up and she strikes up a conversation with me. And it turns out she was transferring midway through sophomore year too, both of us were going to Florida State, and lo and behold, we ended up being roommates and best friends, and I still keep in contact with her. She had a very positive impact on me. She was a very staunch Catholic, and she kept me going to church. She kept me grounded. Without her, I probably would have been loose cannon a little bit. I think she really helped me in a lot of ways. And so I think that's one small thing that happened in my life, but that's one of many that I've noticed, that it feels like sometimes these people you meet are placed there on purpose, and just like the pastor on the plane to me. And so that was probably my most amazing dream that I've ever had. But I've had other dreams. I actually had a dream with Jesus in it once, not too long ago. I actually audibly heard his voice in 2016, correcting me, telling me what I was doing was wrong. I was thinking something that he did not appreciate, and he explained to me in a very reasoned way why what I was doing or thinking was thinking about going down a path. He changed my direction and refocused me, and thank God he did, because it would have been a disaster. And so he has helped me in immensely in many ways. And all I can say is that he's truly, if you seek him, he will find you. If you ask, just to put a little foot in there, just ask. And if you really if you want to find Jesus, he will show himself to you. He'll make himself known.
No, I completely understand where you're coming from. This is not a personal attack. This is not an attack on anything, but it's just to summarize in my own head and correct me if I'm wrong. So with the individualistic, circumstantial, should we say, antidotes or coincidences that have gone through in some people's minds, obviously different in yours, was one of the reasons why you were able to reaffirm faith in yourself, or faith in God, should I say. But what was it in itself that was able to draw you to a God? Or let's put this down into a Pacific. What was it that actually drew you to a Christian God?
Well, that's a good question, because again, one of the reasons I left the Catholic Church was because I wasn't happy with the way that the priests were handling some of those situations that are going on, that they're still not handling it completely properly. The Pope still hasn't figured out a really good way to root out all of those evil people from the priesthoods. And so I left, and I was very disgusted with them, and my family, almost all of my family left too. But I just felt like there's something greater than me. And so I started reading Dalai Lama books. I started reading all of these Eastern religions and thinking, well, Buddhism is really interesting, and it's exotic and much more sophisticated than Christianity. Christianity is just the default here in the United States. So why should I believe in Christianity? And I started reading up on what's his name? Wayne Dyer. He sort of thinks that all religions have some sort of element of truth in them. And his writing kind of directed me again away from Christianity. I started reading books by like the Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield. And I read a lot of different books like that. And so I was thinking the Eastern religion was superior. And I was thinking that God was just a passive force. And that's what the Eastern religions tend to think is God is more passive. He's a part of the universe. And when I had my first spiritual experience, was a very dark experience, which I'm not going to go into, but I'll say that it was a dark experience. And what saved me were prayers. I said the Our Father over and over and over, and that experience ended quite rapidly. And so that drew my attention to the fact that God is very active. He's not passive. So the Eastern faiths are incorrect in that matter. And so it was a personal experience of an active, loving Lord who saved me, that basically directed me back to Christianity. And also, I've also looked a little bit into the Muslim faith. And if you just look at Christianity, in the first few hundred years, Christians were peaceful. They were worshiping very peacefully, and they weren't fighting. They weren't at war. They weren't doing the crusades that they did later, which is unfortunate. They were in many cases, they were persecuted, and the apostles, over 30 years after Jesus walked the earth, the apostles, despite being martyred, almost all of them, despite the fact that they were beheaded and jailed and beaten and stoned, they kept worshiping. They didn't recant. And I compare that to the Muslim faith, because Muhammad was a very violent leader. He went to war. He actually slaughtered a bunch of Jewish people. So the path that they took has always been one of violence and war and jihad. And that's just a much different sort of Lord than our Lord, who basically said those who live by the sword will die by the sword. So I think that just looking at Jesus, in fact, there's a really good book by a guy called Nabil Qureshi called Finding Allah, or Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. And he said he just compared their lifestyles. He just looked at Allah and he looked at Jesus. I'm sorry, Muhammad, and he looked at Jesus and he said, well, it's pretty much game over. Just look at their lifestyles. So Muhammad had 12 wives, which you probably know, and one was 9 when he consummated that marriage. So
no, that's fun. For summaristic, is that a word? For summary,
you can coin new words. Why not?
for summary, would you say that was down to, should we say, personal experience and personal choice that you decided to go for a Christian God, so to speak?
I think I just responded. I think God's always been calling out to me, and I think I finally could hear him. I could finally respond to him in a positive way. I think he waited till I was ready, and then he started even making himself more obvious to me. So I think that I was just responding as a responsible individual would do to his call. And so he wants everyone to come to he wants everyone to the verse that comes to mind is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. So whoever believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. That to me speaks volumes, because it says he wants all of us. He wants you. When you went into church today, he probably was very happy. Now, does your partner, let me just ask you real quick, does your partner believe in Christianity and that you went to the church?
No, she doesn't. No, she doesn't believe in a God, but she really enjoys going now.
That's interesting. It's really interesting, actually, because I would have thought that she believed, and that's why you were going. So both of you are going to church as atheists. Yeah. I like that. Yeah, you keep going. That's a really great plan.
Well, I think it's the case just on that aspect. I think it's the case of we're able to disassociate with the idea of the believing in the God with the actions of just going to church. At least that's in my head. I can't speak for my partner, obviously, but that's what I think in my head. That I'm able to disassociate with the belief in God and understand that the process in itself is a humanistic process rather than it being a religious aspect. I enjoy the social cohesion that's there, so on and so forth.
And that's true. You have probably seen studies that they've talked about a lot of the sense of group settings that are pretty beneficial for people. People do like the social cohesion of churches. So that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, the main reason why me and my partner are going to the church is because I suppose we could say that we believe in sanctity would be the correct word, of marriage in itself, or at least the validation of the idea of marriage, should we say. And that's the reason why we want to do things the proper way and do it the traditional way. I suppose, again, that's dissociating ourselves from the idea of God and the institution of marriage from the church and trying to, I suppose, believe in the sanctity of marriage by itself. I suppose we could go down that road of saying that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that reminds me, I did mention a little bit before we got on here, is the Jonathan Haidt studies with moral foundation theory. I think you'll find this interesting because because you like politics, he distinguishes liberals from conservatives from libertarians. He actually looks at all different groups of people, and he said that people rely on different foundations based on or somehow affected by their politics. And so as a more right-leaning person, a conservative tends to value these 5 different moral foundations, and one of them is sanctity and purity. And so that's consistent with you. Whereas if you lean to the far left, you basically only really pay attention to care and harm and those sorts of values. And fairness. You don't rely as much on sanctity and purity, according to Jonathan Haidt. So I find that fascinating, because you said you're a libertarian, and I forget exactly what the lineup of values is for libertarians, but I think that's also one where you rely more on sanctity and purity. And so it's completely consistent with what you just said. So.
No, I completely agree with what you just said. Apart from the analogy with the left in itself, and I don't like to make sweeping generalizations, but I do understand where you're coming from on that, and that's not an issue that I really want to get into. Though, what I would really like to go down is obviously now we've gone through the point of, I don't mean this as a personal attack, it's more of a summary, so please don't take it that way. But we've sort of ascertained that you have, through a antidotal personal choice, chose that to believe in a God by thinking that there always was one and searching for one, and then going through another, again, not an attack, an antidotal personal response or coincidences that led you down to believing in a certain type of God. Would that be a fair summary, or am I off base on that a little bit?
Yeah, I guess you could call them coincidences, but that's certainly a part of it, where coincidences, chance encounters, those kind of things that just happened to come right after I said prayers and asked for guidance. So yes.
No, that's fair enough.
And I don't recall, to be honest, with the roommate story from college, I don't recall exactly how that came about. I just recall the dream. I really don't recall much else about that. So.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, I'm not going to go into personal antidotes because that's the whole process of the belief system. Whether you believe in a God or you don't believe in a God, you have the reasons and rhymes for why you do and why you don't. And I find it very interesting for I mean, I know the reasons why I don't believe, and I find it extremely interesting the cognitive behavior of how people choose. I use that word as I mean it, to believe in certain aspects and certain reasons for different gods or different God in general, or even of the same, should we say, religion overall, and how different aspects of that religion have now led you to a specific aspect or denomination of that religion. And I find that extremely interesting, but yet at the same time extremely personal to yourself, which can only ever be described by yourself and how you believe you got there. And I find that really interesting overall, how people got to their conclusion of their belief system.
Yes, it's been a path. It's a process. I can say that. So, and if you met me back in my 30s, if you had met me and when I was on that path veering away from Christianity, my sons came up to me, actually my early 40s, my sons came up to me and they said, you know, Mom, how come we're not going to church and the neighbors are going to church? And I felt really guilty, but I did find a church now. I go to a Baptist church and it's a wonderful place. And today's sermon was incredible. And so I can speak to that. So I think that a lot of people rule out churches, or they've had bad experiences in the church and they say, hey, I'm just going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, forget God too. And when you go to some of these churches and you have a really positive experience, as I've had in the Baptist church, it can change you. The Catholic church is very solemn. I also was married in the Lutheran church, very solemn. And the songs are hymns and they're very muted. You go into a Baptist church and it's very loud contemporary Christian music, and the sermon is 40 minutes long and extremely insightful and always digs through the Bible in really amazing ways. So I can say that if someone leaves the church because they're upset with the priests or they're upset with some administrative issues, something like that, it's not a bad idea to try other churches and just see if there's an experience that really works for you.
No, that's fair enough. I think that's the same thing for anything, isn't it? You can quite easily, as you say, throw the baby out with the bathwater if you had a bad experience of, say, something very, very stupid like a Burger King, and never ever go to a Burger King again. But yet another Burger King could have one of the best public service that you could ever have, or personal service that you could ever have, and actually enjoy the experience immensely and then always go back again. I suppose that, again, for me, comes down to the personal aspect and why people believe in the way that they do. Because for me, obviously, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and nobody else, but for me, it seems that people's choices are what leads us down to our belief system. As you, correct me if I'm wrong, you said that you were born basically into religion, as in your parents were believed Catholic?
Mm-hmm. Yes. But the sad thing is my parents left the church and my two brothers left the church. My sister stayed in the church, but the four of them left the church and they haven't come back. And my dad is actually to the point of really being kind of hostile towards churches. I would say that they consider themselves very weak Christians, but they're what many Americans are like. kind of apathetic towards Christianity. They don't. I actually bought them all C.S. Lewis books, and nobody read them. So I bought them this big, huge volume of C.S. Lewis books. And so then I gave away my big, huge volume of C.S. Lewis books to a friend of mine because she was in trouble and I thought this would help her. And I had, so I went to my parents' house and I saw the book sitting there. And I said, have you ever even opened it? No, we're just not interested in reading that. So, oh, all right. So I took the book back. I said, well, I'll just take it back since I was either going to buy myself another one or do that. But it's a tough thing. And so for you, let me ask you real quick.
Yeah, sure.
Did you ever believe in God? I mean, when you were little, were you raised in a Christian faith or were you raised as an atheist?
I was raised as an atheist. I was raised to critically think and believe what I wanted to believe and wasn't told where to go and what to do, so to speak, on that aspect.
Okay.
There was
and that's
a time.
consistent with your culture, isn't it? The United Kingdom, I think you're in England, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. A lot of people, I wouldn't say most, but a lot of people would be atheistic in their beliefs. Or should we say that most people don't care? I think that would be a fairer assessment of the United Kingdom's culture to religion. A lot of people just don't really care about it. They know it's there and it doesn't affect them, so they don't care about it.
I think you're right. And I think it has to do, they've studies by the World Values Surveys out of the University of Michigan with a person called Ronald Inglehart, I'm sorry. He's been doing these globe studies and he actually has noted what he calls Eurosecularization. And it's a trend because of a lot of social safety nets and that sort of thing, and very strong welfare systems and very strong systems for helping people in need. Because of that, a lot of people have veered away from the church because the church, in some sense, provides those sorts of services in many places. And so since those provisions are given by the government, a lot of people might not go back to the church. And so some are saying that that's exactly what has happened in many parts of Europe.
No, I think you're quite fair on that assessment, and obviously who you quoted as well, because if you have the church that's only giving you bread, butter, and water, so to speak, as a way of being able to live, but the government's giving you the chance to go out and buy what you want, you're not really going to associate yourself with the church that often when you can go and get what you want rather than what you're being told to get. So I completely and utterly agree with your assessment on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so he's talked about the movement away from what he calls tradition and religion and movement towards secularization. And so we're seeing it play out definitely in Northern Europe and in Western Europe, especially.
I suppose from you asking me if I ever believed or any, and that question, my answer was that I did actually start to believe when I was a little bit younger, and I had somebody very, very close to me kill themselves accidentally. He accidentally swallowed ball bearing marble, and basically wasn't able to breathe anymore.
Oh, wow, that's horrible.
It is, especially for a 10, 11-year-old at that point in time. But that's
sorry
kind
to hear
of
that.
what it is, what it is, unfortunately. But that's kind of what made me question what was going on in the world and what the purpose was of life, and what I think, as you said before at the beginning, humans are very interesting in finding answers to questions that we may not ever know or ever find out the reasons why. So we try to forcefully interpret what's going on in the world. And I suppose the argument of God of the gaps comes into play at that point, where when you, and this is from my point of view, not from anybody else's, so I'm not trying to force you to say that this is what you do, but this is what I did, where when I didn't understand the reasoning behind it, I kind of slid in, well, maybe it was God's will, maybe God works in mysterious ways, and so on and so forth. I then come to a critical approach of what was going on and understanding of psychology a little bit more when I got a little bit older, and was able to ascertain that no, he was just being a dick, and unfortunately accidents happen. And though that is one of the biggest accidents that you can have when you've lost your life due to negligence on yourself, unfortunately, then that's on you, not on anything else. And that's just the way that I was able to process it and able to work out for myself and change the belief system, where I was able to gain more knowledge in my own idea or my own head. I was able to, should we say, remove the God of the gaps in my own ideology, and was able to actually put some, what I would consider more of a logical reasoning behind it. Now, obviously, everybody's different and everybody can put in what they want to do, because that's what this discussion is about faith and belief systems. I don't know. I find it very interesting overall that how that process come about. It's, as I was going to ask you as well, on top of that, if you were to, if say for instance you were born in an atheistic house or even an agnostic household, do you think that you would even have the idea of the Christian God? Say for instance you were born in I don't know, Brazil, or you were born somewhere that doesn't have a Christianity stem of religion. Do you think that you would still lead yourself towards that, or would you think that it would be more of a cultural upbringing?
I think I would have seeked, just like I did. I actually left Christianity for a very long time. I still identified with Christianity. I still referred to myself as a Christian, but I secretly was following Buddhist beliefs and thinking that that was superior. So I think that doing your due diligence will lead you to Christianity. If people are interested and they really do want the answer, I think that all the doors are going to lead to Christianity. The beauty of it is it explains our origins, our meaning, our morality, and our destiny. It gives us a very full understanding of what goes on in life. And on morality, what's really interesting is if you look at studies like from Shalom Schwartz, where he basically found that everyone on the planet, no matter where you came from, he sampled people from all around the world in all different countries. And he found that the number one and number two values that people adhered to were benevolence, followed by universalism. And the latter refers to a care for the environment and that kind of thing. And so where did that come from, this moral duty to be benevolent, even though we have practices that we aren't necessarily benevolent, but we all have this inner knowledge that we should be benevolent. And other studies have found that when they looked at world religions and they looked at even atheism, humanism, and the United Nations, that everyone has this sense of purpose and meaning and has some sort of a form of the golden rule. And so if we don't have a moral lawgiver, the question is, where did all that come from? Why are we hardwired that way? And where did these moral duties come from? Because our biology and evolution can only explain what is in a descriptive sense. It can't explain any sort of prescriptive information or our moral oughts and duties. And so I think that that stuff in itself is a pretty powerful argument for God. So a loving God.
No, sure. I mean, like I said, I'm not going to go into the aspects of if God and whatnot, but I would very, very quickly put in a counter to that, especially with the benevolence and the universalism as being able to look after the environment. I don't know what your position is on evolution as a whole, but I think we could probably agree, both of us, that we could agree on the microevolution of things at least.
So of course. I'm of the opinion that no matter how God brought us here, God brought us here. So if he brought us here through evolution, I'm completely fine with evolution as posited the way that many scientists in biology posit. I'm fine with that. I just am accepting of it.
Sure, no, that's fine. With that acceptance of at least microevolution, would you think to yourself in this aspect that if we are, as we are, a tribal, should we say a herd species, mm-hmm. then would we not develop benevolence in itself because we would want others to treat us in a fair way? So wouldn't we treat others in the same way to hope to reciprocate that aspect, as well as universalism as looking after the area in which we live and inhabit, so we don't have to keep on moving all the time?
Yeah, you can use the idea of our in-group favoritism certainly is explained through evolution. We can say that as groups, we develop means to protect ourselves, and within our in-groups, we certainly express empathy. The issue that we can't explain, though, through evolution is looking at the out-group empathy. Why are we kind to strangers? Why do people give money to strangers, say in Africa, to help out orphanages and that kind of thing? Why does that happen? And so that can't be explained by evolution, but it's something that we do see in every culture, people helping out-group members.
Well, it can definitely be explained in the idea of psychological evolution, that we grow up to believe in the idea of empathy, or at least in the aspect of a sympathy, as in we can sympathize with the people that don't have anything. So we want to try and give as little or as much as we possibly can, or we could empathize with the people by putting ourselves in that position and hope somebody else that has more affluence was able to help us in our time of need, for instance. So even under the idea, the assumption that, oh, why don't we help our outgroups? The fact is that we do help our outgroups is the point of trade, because we are one of the only animals, obviously, that actually trades with one another, realizing that what we do have can be shared. So the way that we do that is by helping other people to hopefully help ourselves in the future.
Well, it doesn't really explain. I mean, because if you go back to evolution, and you could make that same sort of post hoc argument about selfishness, and you're saying that we somehow know that we need to squash selfishness, but you can also show that selfishness can benefit people in some ways. And we have a lot of leaders who are very selfish people who are doing big things for themselves and building up their resources through selfishness. So the tricky part, though, is looking at what's prescriptive is when we have this compulsion to do good for others and to be empathetic. Where did this compulsion come from? And why do we have a conscience that bugs us when we aren't empathetic? Where did that come from?
I suppose that still comes from the evolution of the psyche, the idea of knowing what the ego, superego, and the id is, as in being able to work out what's good for people, what's bad for people, and what is the reality in ourselves. So when we have evolved as being a social species, we've worked out that if we help each other, then life becomes easier. Where if we try to be, as you said, more of a selfish person, then we realize that we then get segregated and we're on our own, and things are a lot harder at that point, at least in my opinion on that aspect.
Well, that's a theory, but it's more of a just so sort of an argument, because we do again have a lot of business leaders, for example, who have amassed fortunes, who are selfish people. And look at all the CEOs in the United States. You know what the average pay for CEOs here in the United States in a Fortune 500 company is?
180,000 to 220,000.
No, that's the average for all CEOs if you take in the small businesses. But if we look at the Fortune 500, and that would be a reasonable amount. No, Fortune 500 companies, they average $14 million. And there are companies such as, there's a railroad company right now where the CEO is making $230 million a year. So we've got some people who are incredibly selfish, and what's the pay relative to the average worker? Well, they, in our country right now, they're making around anywhere between 200 and 400 times the average worker, which I think is selfish to the extreme. And so the idea I'm just trying to say is that we have these theories on how being selfless and being empathetic is a good thing. And we also have a moral code within us where we know that we ought to be benevolent and universalist. However, there definitely are people who survive and thrive who are quite selfish.
Oh yeah, there's always going to be outliers in every study, in every aspect of anything. There's always going to be outliers. But if you're talking about how society works as a whole, then society works as a whole is in the way that I would have explained, and how other people would have been able to articulate it in a better way. But again, that comes down to belief systems, though, doesn't it? That comes down to the idea of justifying my belief systems versus justifying your belief systems. How we've just had a back and forth about how I believe in this aspect and how you believe in that aspect, and how we can citate different aspects and belief systems from other humans to back up our own beliefs and ideas from other humans.
You're right. Yeah, we could probably go back and forth, and we'll both have to probably agree to disagree on this point. But I appreciate your points. You're making some good points.
I appreciate that. A lot of people call me an idiot, and they would be right.
Well, you saw what I just got on Twitter, and found someone put me into the idiot box. So that person was immediately blocked. His number 6 today. 40 blocked 6 people. It's not even 3 o'clock. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. But I do find that very interesting, how the justification of our own belief systems is generally put onto the ideas of other humans, and how the other humans would rationalize the belief systems. Because if we were to take, let's say, a neutral position of you believe in what you believe and I believe in what I believe, and that those are only belief systems. So in other words, taking the aspect of is God real or not out of the equation, because to you he does and to me he doesn't. So we have sort of Pandora's box, if you will. No, sorry. What's the Schrodinger's cat's situation?
Oh, well, let me ask you a question. If you found out beyond a doubt, beyond anything, that Christianity is the true religion and Jesus Christ really did die for our sins and resurrect, if you found that out as to be true, would you follow Jesus at that point?
I would accept him. I would accept him as being truth. But then, like any truth, then I would have critiques of that truth, especially how I would perceive the contradictions and how some forms of moralistic argumentation would be, in my opinion, different. So, yes, I would believe that he is there, but would I follow him? That's a different question. The same as I don't follow a conservative government, but I believe that a conservative government is there, or vice versa for a Labour government or Democrat, Republican, respectively. So, no, I would accept that he's definitely there. If you could prove that that's happened, or if it was proved that he was there, then sure, I'd believe in him, so to speak. But no, I wouldn't necessarily follow him.
That's interesting. I always wonder when people who call themselves either atheist or anti-theist, it seems to be the anti-theist ones, to me, were the ones who said, I absolutely would not follow him, even if I found out he exists and is true. And then, but the atheists, a lot of times I get two different answers. Sometimes they say, well, absolutely, I'd absolutely follow him if I found that out. And others say, I would believe he exists, like you said. I believe he exists, but yet I wouldn't follow him because I'm unhappy. There's something that you're seeing in life that basically has driven you to determine that what God is doing is not to your liking in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that comes down to, again, the personal beliefs and how our personal beliefs shape our own personal morality, regardless if you believe that it's a universal morality or not. There's still aspects of personal morality. Otherwise, people wouldn't go and rape and do all the other sort of stuff. But no, I'm completely and utterly with you, where a lot of people would change on their ideas, but then would still adhere to the ideas that they already have and their belief systems that they already have. So, yeah, no, I completely and utterly agree with you on that aspect. I can't disagree with you on that. I would believe that there is a God, or there is a Jesus Christ, and there is a God above him, so on, the Father and the Spirit, and so on. But no, I wouldn't follow the way that God is written, at least in the Bibles that I've read.
Okay, so, and I don't mean to, I'm kind of like asking you questions, and I know it's your floor, but I'm curious. Are your parents still atheists?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, they've always been atheists.
Okay.
Though my dad's probably more of a theist, because my dad kind of believes that he calls it karma, but he believes that there's some sort of form of entity that is overseeing, so to speak. My mum not so much, but my dad's kind of like, there's something there, I just don't know what it is.
Interesting. Yeah, that you probably heard of Antony Flew, and he, very famous atheist, and then towards the end of his life, he became a deist. So he kind of similar beliefs, believes something's there, but he didn't want to say it was Christianity. He didn't support Christianity.
Well, I suppose that's the thing. A thing with deists in themselves, that they believe that there is a kind of a God because they have that rationale to think that there is. But to believe in the aspect of a religion, that's I think that's quite interesting. I do think that's quite interesting, actually, to be fair. Because if you do have the aspect of believing that there is a form of a God, that means that you disassociate with all religions. Now, I suppose I can't really ask you this question, but I can ask it as a universal question to anybody that wants to answer in general. If you believe in a sort of a form of a God under the idea of a deist or deism, then what is it that turns you off of all of the religions, every single religion? Because otherwise you would be a Buddhist or a Taoist, or you'd be a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or whatever. But you say that you're a deist, so that means that you disagree with all of the man-made religions, if you will. I find that very, very interesting, actually.
You know, I interviewed a deist on my channel. He calls himself Brass Wisdom on Twitter. And he was really funny because he basically believes that there is a higher power that powered the universe. The argument, the cosmological argument that you've probably heard before. He believes that this higher power powered the universe, and then just sort of tucked away and disappeared. And so I think that's interesting. And so he says, I said to him, I said, well, if you had any spiritual experiences where it might lead you to one faith or another. And he said that he kept seeing the numbers 316, and his Bible, he had a Bible at his house, and he said it would fall on the floor and open up to John, the page that had John 316 on it. And then he kept noticing this numbers 316 kept appearing to him. And it's interesting. And I've actually interviewed a few atheists that, he's a deist, as I mentioned, but I've actually interviewed a few atheists too, that I said, if you had a spiritual experience, and a lot of them have had spiritual experiences, which I find really fascinating, and how they fit that into a naturalistic worldview. And so to me, it sort of would be cognitive dissonance if you think that you're having these spiritual experiences, but like you don't acknowledge the fact that there's a metaphysical truth. And so I think I know I just prefaced it and ruined it for myself, because you'll say you've never had a spiritual experience, and maybe you haven't, but.
No. If you believe, no, I'm not one of those types of people. If you believe you've had a spiritualistic incarnation that's happened to yourself, then that's your reality. Belief is shaped by your reality. So if you believe that you have had this, regardless of if I do or don't, then that shapes your reality. So I would never go across saying that you haven't had this, you haven't had that. I'd ask you to prove it, but to you, that's a personal antidote, and that's how you're going to believe. I can't change the way you believe by using personal antidotes. And that's not what the goal of this is either. It's to understand why we believe the way that we believe, and what leads us to those beliefs.
Yeah. No, I think those are great questions. And I think it's really important that people ask those questions, and they aren't apathetic. There are so many people, as you mentioned, who are just full of apathy towards religion. They really just don't care. And so I can even think of some people. I remember I talked to Kyle, who's on Non Sequitur show.
Yeah.
And he said something like, I just don't care. That's exactly what he said. He said he's an atheist, but he really doesn't even care if there is a God. He doesn't care. So I thought that was interesting.
No, I find that very, very interesting, because I don't want to dog on the skeptic YouTubers, and I don't want to go on a dog-in session or anything, but from the conversation that we're having, I do find that the people that are most against religion are generally, especially sections of religion, and I find this more interesting, that if you have an ex-Mormon, then generally they will attack Mormonism more than they will attack anything else. And I've noticed that all the way through the skeptic YouTubers in general, where they will attack the religion that they come from the most, as in a way of, I don't know, I'm obviously projecting, thinking that maybe that's a way of getting back at them. Where if you look at people that are not part of religion, they generally critique the religion rather than it being a case of necessarily the God and everything else like that. Because I don't know if there is or there isn't. I can't prove either way. Same as, no, in my opinion, nobody else can prove either way at that point. It is a belief system for me. I am atheist because I do not see enough evidence for me to believe. That's me taking a position to say I'm atheist because I believe there is no gods. I cannot say that I'm agnostic because I'm taking a position.
Yeah, so you're not one of those lack of belief type atheists.
No.
Okay.
No, I've looked at the evidence, and for me, I can't. Sorry, carry on. I talked over you. Please carry on.
Oh, no, I know. I think that's actually a good position to have. Either you don't believe or you do believe, but this idea of I lack a belief, I think that's kind of weak to me. So sorry, lack of believers.
Well, I find that very interesting, because the lack of the belief in itself, is that not a belief that you lack the belief? I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to go around in a circular argument of saying belief. But I do find it interesting overall that, I have a lack of belief that there is a God. Okay, so why are you arguing that there is no God? You're not trying to find out the proofs of that, because if you were, you'd only be asking questions. You're arguing against the position. So does that not mean that you have a position?
You're right. And I think it's because they want to shift the burden of the proof to the believer. So they by saying I lack a belief and saying you do believe, then the person who's a believer has the positive belief and has to be the one to prove the position's correct.
No, that's fair enough. I suppose I should stop dogging on the skeptic YouTubers, otherwise they will descend.
Well, actually, have you heard of a person called Steve McRae?
I have indeed, yes. I love talking. Well, I love watching him. I've never spoken to him, unfortunately, apart from on Twitter.
Yeah, he's one of the he's very funny because he likes to get in these little Twitter battles all day long. And if you just if someone types in that they lack a belief, then sometimes I've copied Steve, and he'll go in and he likes to argue about that a lot because he doesn't think that position is compelling. He thinks you should either be an agnostic like he is or be an atheist who says I don't believe. So.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, again, that comes down to belief system, doesn't it? It comes down to he has looked at the literature for himself that he's now taken from other humans and their belief system, and he's, should we say, adopted that idea and that belief using the logic that he understands, same as other people go the opposite way.
Exactly. And you mentioned Mormons, and I think he at some point was going to the Mormon church.
I believe he's the next Mormon, yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of in line with what you said. And so, yeah, I have seen that. There is a group of people also that you mentioned on YouTube who are more anti-theists, and it does seem to me that the ones that I've met or chatted with do tend to have animosity towards the particular church where they came from.
Yeah, no, I've definitely noticed that quite a bit. And I think that destroys should we say, the idea of the word skepticism, because then it's kind of like more of a personal vendetta. Because you have a belief system where you feel that you were tricked, I suppose, into believing that idea. If you've left the religion, then you kind of want to try and, I suppose, again, I'm projecting and trying to project myself onto other people and empathize with their feelings. But I suppose it's a case for them. They're trying to stop people necessarily making the same mistake that they think that they made. So they're fighting against people making the same mistake. At least that's the way that I try and look at it, though I'm probably completely not wrong and trying to speak for other people.
I think that seems pretty fair, and I think to be all in all honesty, I think a lot of churches do contain people. They say that churches are basically hospitals for sinners, and a lot of churches do contain people who aren't terribly. I mean, in some cases, they're so dogmatic. And they force their views on other people, and I think that turns a lot of people off, especially if the dogmatism is to a really high level where they start critiquing other Christians and saying you're not living your life according to how I think you should be living your life, or you just think this way and I think you should think that way. And that speaks to people like the Young Earth crowd, because they tend to be very opinionated and they tend to kind of force their opinions on the old Earth crowd. And so it can be a challenge to deal with people like that. And I think a lot of the atheist YouTubers I've even met have come out of the Young Earth group.
Yeah. No, I'm completely not with you on that. I do think that as I tried to say before, one's reality is shaped by one's belief systems. So if you have the belief of being something beforehand, and then finding out that everything you believed in your opinion was a lie, then you're going to go against that opinion, which means that the belief system that you had is now what is shaping you to go against the belief system that you did have. So that's your reality shaping around your beliefs.
Yeah, and it seems to me that there are two reasons why people might decide that they don't want to believe in, or they don't believe in God. And I think sometimes the reasons are, and I think because you were raised as an atheist, I think in the way that you've decided that you don't believe is, I think it probably was based on what you consider rational reasoning. But I think there are some people, especially who come out of these churches, rather angry. I think in some cases it's emotional. I think their reasoning for leaving is emotional instead of rational. So,
I mean, again, that comes from your own belief system, and their own reality is what's shaping them, and vice versa for yourself. I mean, again, I know that I've been projecting my ideas and feelings onto other people, so I can't really go, well, I think you're wrong because, but, I think you're wrong because.
Yeah, so do you get, am I one of the first Christians you've interviewed?
Yeah, yeah. Apart from a co-host that I've had before, which his belief system is a little bit weird, but yeah, overall, you're the first one that I've had a specific conversation about Christendom and belief systems in itself.
Oh, good. So I get that distinction. Thank you.
Yes. To make it a bit smutty, you popped my cherry.
Oh, no. So now the door's open. You're gonna have to keep interviewing Christians and find out why we have this crazy belief system, right?
Well, I don't want to limit it to just one religion.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
because I don't think. Yeah, I don't feel that I should limit it. If I'm going to do the ideas of the philosophy behind the belief systems in themselves, then limiting it to just one religion doesn't do anything, because everybody has different beliefs and can justify their beliefs and justify the reasoning behind it. And that's what I'm more interested in. I'm not interested in attacking the religion, because every belief system in itself has aspects of it that could be morally repugnant, regardless of what the morals sanctions are behind any of it. So I don't really want to focus on one aspect of a particular religion. I want to focus on the aspect of belief systems.
Oh, that's good. I think you should interview people of other faiths. I think that's a great idea. I have my coworkers. I've got good friends who are Jewish, good friends who are Muslim, and good friends who are Hindu. Those are the three faiths that are all. And I have, of course, Christian friends too. But in my workplace, I interact with them quite frequently, and every once in a while we do talk about religion, and it's interesting to see what their points of view are. So I concur. That's a great idea.
No, I find that very interesting, because when you have, again, I'm dogging on the skeptic YouTubers, and it's completely up to them what they want to do, and it's their channels, and it's completely up to them, and it's their freedoms to do everything. But if in general that they are so against the idea of religion, then why have they made it to, should we say, again, using the word, a personal vendetta, as in, I'm going to go against Christendom because, not I'm going against religion. If you disbelieve in any of the gods, so to speak, or even the agnostic approach, I don't know until, then wouldn't you go against all of religion rather than just picking up on one aspect of religion that you've had in your own past?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And they'll argue, because I've actually talked to some of them about that. They'll argue that in their cultures, Christians are the ones, a lot of times, like in the United States culture, Christianity is the majority view. And so they'll argue that Christians are basically the ones who are doing the wrong things, and that's why they have their attention on Christians. But they say if they were in India, they'd be focused on Hindus, and if they were in Pakistan, they'd be focused on Muslims. So that's usually what I've heard, because they're in the cultures where this particular religion is big.
No, I mean, I completely understand where it's coming from. I mean, that argument then stems from the same thing as going, why are you Christian? Is it because of culture? It still comes from that aspect of, I suppose, philosophy, epistemology, sorry, correct word, of your thought. Because you're thinking that the area in which you grew up has this amount of Christians in, or this amount of that in, or this amount of whatever in. So my due process is to go against these people because I perceive them as bad people. I don't see that. I see people under their belief systems and under their behavioral. So if you tell me that you're Christian and you enjoy being a Christian and whatnot, which I'm sure you do, obviously, then my questions would be, well, what are your beliefs on, say, for instance, gay rights and things like that, or LGBTQ and things like that? Now, I don't necessarily want you to go into that, but if you wanted to, you're more than welcome to. But those are my points. If you believe in a God and it's a Christian God, I don't care, so to speak, on that aspect. I care on the belief system of it, but I'm not going to judge you because you are a Christian. I'm going to judge you on what you do with that belief. So if you condemn people because of your belief, then I want to know why you would do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't condemn people because of my belief. I support gay rights. I support gay marriage, actually. I'm all about that. And I'm okay if gay people want to adopt children, gay people adopt children. I'm actually fine with that. So the reason I'm fine with the idea of gay marriage is because is because there's government benefits to getting married, including tax savings. And so I don't think, in hospital stays and that kind of thing, I don't think it's fair to discriminate against one group and say that they're not allowed to get married, hence they can't collect the tax benefits and that kind of thing. So that's why I'm behind it, for that reason. I think it's just recognized by the government. Doesn't necessarily mean God is recognizing the marriage, but it's government sanctioned. So.
See, I find that very interesting. I'm not going to pick apart and pile onto you and go, oh, your morality is this and your morality is that. I'm not going to do that. But I find it interesting how to justify the position that you hold, which is, in my opinion, the correct position regardless. It's kind of the mental gymnastics, and I don't mean this to personally attack you or anything else like that, but the mental gymnastics of going, well, if I take God out of this, so to speak, and I insert my political beliefs, because I believe that's where you were going with that, then I can justify it. Or would I be wrong in that assumption?
I think that there are a lot of things in the Bible. There are a lot of rules that relate to things like sanctity and purity, as you kind of mentioned, we talked about a little bit before. For example, if you're going to go after people who are gay, you should also be going after people who engage in fornication before marriage. So that's something that also should be pulled out. Or you should go after people who are overdoing it, over drinking or that kind of thing. So there's all these different things that people do, and that in the Bible, basically God says, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. So I don't think it's fair to pull people who are gay, especially because I found biological reasons why some people are gay. You're more likely to be gay if you're, say, a second, third, or fourth brother because of something that happens in the pregnancy of the mother. So I think because there's biological reasons for it, I don't think it's fair to discriminate against people based on that.
No, I mean, I completely not agree. I mean, I don't think it's fair to discriminate people based on, should we say, their mental capacity or their sanity levels in that aspect, I suppose would be the best one on that one. Though I would like to reframe that same question. Is that you trying to take your own aspects of belief systems and trying to shape it into the way that you want something to be, as in the Bible and whatnot? Or is it you, should we say, cutting off the Bible on that aspect and trying to justify it with other verses to be able to say, well, I think this is good because blah, blah, blah?
I can say that I look at just my own character rather than going out there and, what Jordan Peterson says that I think resonates quite well is make sure your own house is taken care of before you go out there and start trying to judge other people's houses. It's if somebody wants to be gay, I think they should have equal rights, and that's pretty much where it ends. If I can keep my own self in alignment with exactly what God wants, then I'm happy about that. So I'm not going to be looking out the windows at other people and judging people. God tells us not to judge people. So I don't think that's a good move. And so I let them live their lives. They know what they're doing, and I respect that. And so I know what I'm doing. And so I just try to keep my own house in order. Besides, the idea of planks in your eyes. You say, oh, you're living this lifestyle, you're doing that. I'm not that kind of a person. I'm not going to judge other people for what they want to do. It's not my business. And I don't have, nobody in my family's gay, so I really don't have this interaction with gay people and even really a need to be thinking about it too much.
No,
it's not an issue in my family. It's not an issue in my house. So.
No, that's fair enough. I suppose what I'm trying to really get out behind the back door of using that as the reference is trying to say, do you believe everything that is in the Bible and everything that's in the Bible is the word of God? Or just to preface the question, do you think that there is some, should we say, more of a humanistic approach for the times when it was written, rather than it just being how God has decided everything to be? Do you think humans have put their own interpretation on what you would perceive as God's word?
Yeah, I definitely think humans put their own interpretation of God's word. I think that if you look at the Old Testament and you look at verses such as Daniel 9 and Isaiah 53, those are just two, but there are many verses that actually completely point to Jesus. And Jesus came and he fulfilled the laws of the Old Testament and basically set a new covenant with us. And so for us, what we just need to do and what humanity has been constantly evolving towards is a better, higher level of morality, more in line with the example Jesus set. And so, yes, I believe the Bible is inerrant, but I believe that people's interpretations can be erroneous. That's probably where I'd go with that. And that's why I say with young earth creationists, for example, they insist on 6 24-hour days, and they insist that other people take their particular interpretation. And I just don't think that that's necessarily responsible. I think it's not fair for me to say, this is my interpretation of the Bible, and therefore you must also have my same interpretation. I just don't think that's fair. So that's one thing I would point to.
No, I completely understand where you're coming from. But I mean, more with the fact of not the interpretation of the Bible, so to speak, but the actual people that wrote the Bible. Would they have put their own interpretation on God's word as writing in the Bible, do you think? Or is it as it states for yourself and belief that it is the word of God, regardless of who wrote it and any interpretation they may have had on it when writing?
Yeah, so you're asking a really good question, and let's just dig into that a little bit. Let me first point out that, yes, I think it's all the word of God. I think that the writers were influenced by God. He's probably speaking through them, and I believe that for all 40 writers. You might realize the Bible was written, it's 66 books that was written over 1,500 years by 40 different authors, and the authors were of all different walks of life, from kings down to tax collectors, and tent makers. That's what Paul was, a tent maker. And so we have all of these different people, 3 different languages, 3 different continents, over 1,500 years, but yet it's remarkably cohesive. And that tells me that God is behind it. It is the word of God. It's logos. And so I'm in support of an inerrant Bible, but people who have errors, sometimes people have errors.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, it kind of partially answers my question, especially at the end. People have errors, so that kind of answers my question. I'm not dismissing the first part of the answer either. It's just funny that the caveat at the end was people also have errors. So I found that.
Well, the interpretations, like when people read the Bible today, a lot of times they want to have their own interpretations of all these different passages. And the Bible is written to an extent where it's written for the simplest person, and then it's written for a very complex person. It's written in such a way that the simple person will get something out of it, and the complex person, a person who's very highly educated, can look at it and dig into it. It's almost like an onion where you can dig into deeper meanings in just about every verse that's in there. It's really truly amazing. And you have to read it also thinking in the context of the ancient Near East and what those sorts of people were going through in those cultures to understand why we see some of the things we see in there. So going back to the idea of inerrancy, Bart Ehrman wrote this book called Misquoting Jesus, and he has 3 different versions of the book. In the third version, in the second version, he actually had this part in this appendix where he said that even though he talks about the telephone game and he talks about this kind of Bible errors and little things like that and scribal errors, he says that the core tenets of Christianity are still in the Bible, and what we have today is basically representative, contains all the core tenets. He admits that, and he put that in his second thing, which basically means that he accepts the idea of the resurrection, because that's the major tenet of the Bible. So.
Well, any Christian or any Christian that's sympathetic towards the idea would have to first believe in the resurrection. Otherwise, the faith in itself would fall. So,
I agree. Yeah. St. Paul said that too. but that's where I was when I was with that pastor on the plane that I mentioned before. He asked me flat out, he said, "Do you believe in Jesus?" And I wasn't even sure. I remember getting really shaky and saying, yeah, I just wasn't sure. And I had to go back. I was a very, very far liberal Christian. And there are some Christians out there like that. They actually don't think that Jesus resurrected. They just believe in Christianity because they like some of the Christian practices and Christian ethics. And I find that very interesting. But I was also kind of like that. So I get it.
Do you think, obviously you can't speak for other people, but you could speak for yourself back in the day, so to speak. Do you think that that's an aspect of trying to necessarily keep the identity, but without the stigma of the identity? Because obviously any religion has its good and bad stigmata.
Yeah, and I think that that's what some people try to do. There's a woman I've encountered on Twitter actually who lives up in Canada, and she sometimes goes into a church and she considers herself a Christian, but yet she doesn't acknowledge or believe in Jesus or the resurrection. But she wants to sort of make her own faith. And I don't think that that's consistent with what Jesus called on us to do. He basically called on us to believe the faith as it's written in the Bible and as the New Testament lays out as far as his experience and that. So I don't think that that's, looking back on my old self, I used to think like that. And I used to think that all doors lead to heaven. I wasn't realizing how Jesus really was focusing on all doors through him lead to heaven. You won't get to heaven without going through Jesus. And so that applies to everyone on the earth. And so it applies to even if people are raised in a different faith.
Mm. No, I find that very interesting because, I mean, again, I suppose I can only try to ascertain from your own levels because we can't speak for other people. But I suppose we could hypothesize. Would you, from your own experience, would you be able to, should we say, push on a little bit and go to the point of answering, would it be a case of you thinking that you had a crisis of faith at that point in time, but didn't want to take away the aspect of being a Christian or the label, if people want to use that word?
I wouldn't say it was a crisis. I was just searching. I was in constant searching. And I have a book downstairs that was even called How to Know God. And it was by the Dalai Lama, How to Know God. And I really wanted to know what the truth is. I really wanted to know what the truth was. And so I did everything I could do to try to find it. And I was reading, for some reason, I thought that, again, Eastern faiths were superior, but God didn't let me continue down that path. He showed me that that was incorrect. So if I go back to my experiences, I have always just really wanted to know what the truth is.
I suppose that could go to the skeptic point then of going, what, you mean your truth? Because at the end of the day, that's how any of us decide what truth is. We just try to conform to our other consensus or to our understanding of truth.
You're right. And actually, that's a good point, because we each do come into our environments with a certain set of schemas and a certain set of prior beliefs. And so we build upon those beliefs. And so when I come into an environment with the belief that God exists and Jesus is God, Jesus is our Lord, then a lot of times what happens can be confirmatory bias. So there is some of that, and I'll be the first to admit it. We have presuppositions, we all do. You're coming in with the idea that there is no God, and so when you encounter people and you encounter events, you're taking that schema that's within you and you're using that to explain it to yourself exactly what is going on. And so I think I have to be honest, it just happens.
No, I completely agree with you. We're hardwired as humans as that way, to be able to make quick, snappy decisions, schema, to be able to try and fit in with our worldview, to understand what we perceive our reality to be. That's the reason why a lot of people will go, oh, what's really reality? Now, me personally, I don't ascribe to that idea. Reality is what we all perceive all at the same time. And that's the reason why we form consensus of opinions, to be able to conform to an opinion.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm just thinking of the idea that you just said. So you're not a postmodernist.
No, not particularly. No, I'm not, definitely not of the person that goes, well, am I really here? Am I really talking to you? Well, if I'm not, I'm having one hell of a goddamn trip.
Exactly.
But I suppose I've been talking to you for a good hour now. Would you like to ask me any questions? Because I don't want it to be a one-way thing where I'm critiquing you or challenging you all the time. I would like it for you to be able to come at me a little bit as well, because otherwise it's just not a discussion. It's a one-way talk.
Okay. Well, let me first say that we can probably go till maybe another 10, 15 minutes. Does that sound about right?
That's perfect. As long as you've got the time, that's fine with me.
Okay. Yeah, sure. And so I'm just wondering, what would it take for you what sort of a sign, if you were out there and you said, well, I don't believe, but if Christianity is true, what would it take for you to come to that belief?
Well, I'm not going to take somebody like Aaron Ra's position, which is I would need God to come up to me and tell me he's true. But I would need a form of direct evidence. And by that, I don't mean something that's written by humans. I don't mean what I can explain by a naturalistic viewpoint. Something that is completely and utterly unexplainable to me, that has, to me, a direct link or causation from something outside of our realm of normality.
Okay, so you basically would say a spiritual experience, that's something that you couldn't explain in natural terms.
I wouldn't necessarily say a spiritual experience, because then that could be put down to dreams or to what I would say you experienced, and I know you wouldn't, but as in coincidental experiences. I would need something almost directly correlating to a God, as in something almost levitating type thing, but then I could attribute that to other supernaturalistic tendencies, I suppose.
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you ever practiced in anything like an occult or anything like that?
Hell no. I mean, no.
Just asking. I'm just asking because I read Hugh Ross's books. I've actually read 6 of his books, but he's got a book that he talks about people's encounters with demonic activities, and a lot of times people think that he actually associated that with UFOs and aliens and people involved in the occult. They tend to be more likely to experience these supposed alien encounters, and so in his views, he thinks the alien encounters are actually demons. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. And so I'm always curious if anyone says, yes, I practice in the occult, then I'm curious to see what happened next.
that would be an interesting belief system.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, I was on David. Do you know David Smalley?
The name rings a bell, but I can't say I know of him.
He's another atheist and he's a comedian, and I got on his channel and I told him about Hugh Ross and about that kind of stuff because he was going to interview Hugh Ross. And so what he did, I can't even believe he did this. So he went and he bought a Ouija board, and on his next show with somebody else, they both used the Ouija board, which is actually pretty dangerous if you believe like I do. That's not a good thing to do because you're opening the door to some dark activities. And so that was what he did. And so I thought, oh my gosh, crazy guy. So
no, I mean, with things that people don't understand, I think a lot of people do it to try to prove to themselves that these things are not necessarily real. To me, I don't think that in that aspect that I would risk my belief system. And I don't mean the destruction of the belief system. I mean the belief in maybe this is right, maybe this is wrong, to be able to play with something like a Ouija board, or even to burn a Bible or to burn the Quran or that aspect. Put it this way, I wouldn't like to throw stones in glass houses. I'll put it that way. I think that would be an easier way of explaining things.
That makes sense. So yeah, not a good idea to play with. And I wouldn't burn a Quran either. I wouldn't burn anybody's holy text. I think that would be terrible to the person who actually believes in the Quran. So yeah. I wouldn't do that for that reason. I think that'd be hurtful. So now, if you said, when are you getting married?
I have to get this right. May 20th.
Oh, okay. So you're getting married next year in 2020. Yeah. Okay, so May 20th. That's great. So you've already set a date. So if you have children, are you going to raise them as atheists too?
I will let them choose what they want to do. If they want to be any sort of form of religion, then that's up to them. I'm not going to be somebody that tells somebody else what they need to believe.
That's good. And that's probably what your parents did with you too, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
They just said, do you have any siblings?
I do, yes. I have a sister and a stepbrother.
Do they believe in God?
No, as far as I'm aware. I'm not too sure on my stepbrother. He never really spoke about religion, but my sister definitely not.
Okay, interesting. So I just always wonder if it runs in families, if one person is an atheist, the other ones are atheists. I have one of my brothers just told me that he announced that he's an agnostic now. And so there's that. And he lives in Germany. So he lives in Berlin, actually, in Germany. And he told the family he's an agnostic. And I had a dream about him before he told me he was an agnostic, or I should say admitted he was an agnostic. And it was a really strange dream. And so where he was being led away. So it's kind of strange. So we have one family member definitely who's that. And I have another family member, my brother, he was voted class clown when he was in high school, and he's still like the class clown. So he got on Twitter and called himself Dylan Atheist and started sending me these nasty messages. And I thought, who is this idiot? My brother. So I was getting ready to block him.
Yeah.
That's what's going on in my house.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, to take that as an extraction, I always find that the level of discourse between people that believe and people that don't believe, because it's such to me, a subjective ideology or idealistic conversation. To me, it's almost an emotional conversation. Like I said, to me, I know a lot of people will go, oh no, it's fact. But to me, it's more of an emotive conversation, because you're trying to convince the other person that you either believe or you don't believe in the reasons why behind it. Where I don't understand why people try to I do understand why people want to do that, because they want to reaffirm their belief system and prove that their belief system is right to themselves and to others. So I do understand the reasons why. But if you wanted to change the person's mind, regardless of what side of the fence you're on that aspect, why would you go out of your way, so to speak, to completely demean the other person? And I've seen it on both sides as well, but to completely demean the other person by calling them different names or saying what your belief system is stupid and whatnot. Do people actually honestly think that that's going to change people's minds? Or do you think that there's more of a chance of you changing my mind, for instance, in this type of conversation than me going at you trying to change your mind?
Yeah, I think you're mentioning a good thing. I think it's very important that we stay on a nice level, try to stay positive, try to interact with people in a humane way. I think that's really important. And I don't think you're never going to change somebody's mind by calling them stupid.
Yeah.
And so I saw Thomas Westbrook, who calls himself Holy Kool-Aid.
Yes.
He tweeted something about how when he was little and kids are slow, he learned that Santa wasn't real. And he said, well, why do we say when there's a 90-year-old grandmother who believes in God, why don't we accuse her of also being slow? And I thought, well, now why are you saying that? You can't just generalize, saying that all of the 93% of people in the world who are believing in some form of a higher being are slow. I don't think that's fair. There's a lot of very intelligent and educated scientists and that who also believe in God. So I don't think that's very effective, like you mentioned. I think it's the most effective thing is just being kind to people and trying to just share the word in a positive way. And I look at my own brother, he and I get along really well, believe it or not. So we used to, when we were little kids, we were like oil and water. We'd fight a lot.
Yeah.
He was the one where I fought with him the most. But as we've gotten older, we get along quite well, even though I know he's an agnostic. I'm not trying to push my beliefs on him, because I think he is where he wants to be. If he doesn't want to be an agnostic, he'll do something, but it's not going to work from me saying, Mike, you need to read this book or you need to do that. That's not going to happen. So.
A question on that then. Do you, if it's too personal, please obviously tell me and we'll move on. But do you think a reason that might be the reason why you fought as brothers and sisters do, so to speak, do you think it could be the fact of how he may have been fighting against the religion that may have been in the house? As in, he's decided that he's now, should we say, to use a lack of a better word, came out as agnostic. Do you think that that was something that he always had and was fighting against, and that's the reason why he focused an attention onto you, so to speak, or is it just normal brother and sister stuff?
In his case, it was brother and sister stuff, and some of it completely my fault.
Right.
Like for example, when I was little, and he's 4 years younger than I am, and when I was little, I made a shoebox, and the box had a hole in it, and it had the string that you could pull up and you could put money in it. And so I told my brother, I said, hey, you want to buy this shoebox? And he said he did. And he gave me his last $5, so he had no money to put in the shoebox.
Oh dear.
And then he wanted his money back because he realized he had no money to put in the shoebox. And I felt bad. I said, no, I'm not giving you the money back. So he came after me and he kicked a hole in the wall. But those are examples. And there was another time when I don't know if you've ever heard that song by Alamo and Patsy, Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer. I made it. I changed the name to his name, being run over by a reindeer, and I started singing it. We were in a ski lodge, and he punched me in the nose and gave me a bloody nose. We've had our ups and downs, and those were my fault. My mom even said, she said, "You're egging him on. Why do you do that?" And so I said, "Oh God, I don't know. I just like pushing his buttons."
Oh. Well, I know that you said that you only got a couple of minutes, well, about 10 minutes ago. So do you have any questions that you would like to ask me at all? Any more questions at all? Or would you like to end the stream as it is?
Well, let me ask you one quick question, and maybe it's not so quick, but what's your take on Brexit?
I think that anybody that wants to follow the idea of democracy should realize that the democratic process was that the country as a whole or the union as a whole voted to leave, regardless of whether you think it was a small margin or a big margin, it voted to leave. The implementation of democracy states that should be implemented.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'm just curious because you're there, you're in the midst of it. I figured I'd just ask you that because that's a kind of a hot button that's going on right now.
Yeah. No. I'm very, should I say, strong Brexit. I'm a very, very strong Brexit supporter. I believe in the nation state, so to speak, being able to look after itself and being able to trade with the rest of the world and having its own identity and sovereignty. If it's in a union with the European Union and its laws are being dictated, then it no longer has any form of sovereignty, and you might as well just be called the EU rather than Great Britain.
Yeah, your views are consistent because as a libertarian, I think that would probably be the consistent opinion.
I hope so.
Yeah. No, I guess that's all I have to say. I want to say thank you so much for having me on your channel. I've really appreciated it, and I haven't had a chance to follow the chat so much, but it looks like it was kind of lively, so that's good.
Yeah, it seems like it wasn't too bad, to be fair. Religion is one of those things like politics. Somebody's always got an opinion of it and always has a personal belief of it. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to pick religion to start off with as a belief system, because everybody has an opinion on Christianity or Christendom. And if it's a good thing, a bad thing in between, everybody has an opinion on it. So it's something that somebody can always grab onto and being able to go, well, I believe this because, and be able to explain their belief systems a bit more, rather than going, I know that we're able to do this, but rather than going on to politics and going, well, do you think Labour's this or do you think the Democrats are that? It's, again, a personal aspect of the information that you've taken in and used to formulate your own reality.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. So.
Yeah, no worries then. Is there anything that you'd like to do, like to plug your channel or anything else at the end, a final word type of thing?
Oh, sure. So if you want to find me, you can find me here on YouTube at SJ Thomason. If you type that in, my channel will come up. Or if you go to Christian-apologist.com, that's where I publish blogs, and I have well over 130 blogs that I've published on all different aspects of Christianity. Or you can find me on Twitter at LEAD1225. So thank you. And I want to say you're a very polite host. I've really enjoyed this, and I think that if you want, I can refer you to other Christians if you want to continue with other people on here. So I have quite a few good friends who like coming on channels. And so if you're interested in continuing with maybe some of them, I'll share their names with you.
Yeah, I'd love to. That would be amazing.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
If anybody as well wanted to, rather than trying to search for SJ's links, I have linked them in the description box down below. So you can just go straight to her social medias, as I've linked her Twitter and I've linked her YouTube channel. So if you do want to go and have a look at what she thinks and feels, then go ahead. I've linked it down below.
Thank you.
Yeah. So apart from that, I will end the stream here. And as I would normally do to everybody, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you very much for listening. I will see you all again very soon. Thank you very much, and
Thank
bye-bye
you.
for now. Take care.